And this builds on some previous work, as previously has noted. In 2015, there was also the Clean Water Bond for Maine, and that also allocated around $5 million towards stream crossing improvements. That was leveraged to over $11 million in awarded projects. I think 79 projects in all 16 counties. That really was possible through a lot of partnerships who brought a lot of match to those projects, and over 40%, I believe, as the average award on those projects. And we're seeing that again. So we have just finished up our 2017, our first round of grants were awarded earlier this year. You can go onto our DEP webpage about that, but similarly awarded just nearly $2.5 million worth of projects for a total with over $5 million because of that match. The partners in these projects are for municipally owned roads, but there is a number of co-benefits here. Climate resiliency is one of them, and I think that's a lesson here. So while there's wildlife and fish passage benefits, and these are for structures that we already know are issues, that you're seeing failures, that that gets demonstrated in the application process. They also include public safety. All of this is the evaluation criteria that the department uses in these projects, and we can build on the knowledge and put out resources like from the Stream Smart principles, like from Stream Stats for hydrology and investments into that for Maine data specifically, like the Stream Habitat Viewer, and all of that is available for resources as folks are doing these applications. So we have more information on our website. John McLean, for those who don't know him, would be a great point of contact for more specifics. You can always check out our new newsroom. We have a lot of out there on this program, past awards and current opportunities. So right now, applications we're accepting for our second round through November 12th of this year, and we know that there's going to be more opportunities coming in the year ahead from the 2018 transportation funding. So more to come. And the next one here I wanted to talk about, this one may be a little less familiar, is funding that the DEP has been providing for wastewater utilities to do adaptation planning. This is, for those familiar with our Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, we have an opportunity as states to provide loan principal forgiveness, which is essentially an incentive. And since 2015, the department has been providing loan principal forgiveness for climate adaptation plan development. Municipalities or quasi-municipal owned wastewater utilities are eligible for up to $20,000 to do an adaptation plan. And we bring a lot of additional technical assistance to that. We assign as a department one of our engineers to the project. And what's interesting about this particular one is it can be done either in conjunction with a construction loan, or it can be done as a standalone project. And so as a standalone, it really functions more similar to a grant. We found that this is really successful in terms of informing what other improvement projects might already be identified, and then could then be applied for a construction loan through the traditional Clean Water SRF, following or in conjunction with. And this program has really been gaining a lot of popularity. The first year we only had a couple of interested communities, but we've now had 25 utilities either complete plans in progress or have committed to completing plans in the next couple of years. So for the first time this past year, we had more communities asked than we actually had available. So a good and bad there, but these are communities in coastal areas and inland areas. There's a lot of transferable lessons to learn, and there's more information all on our links there. And either connect with me or Brandy Piers is in our water quality division about that, and we'd be happy to provide more information. The timeline for this is In February of each year, the department sends out a message, email, through town managers, superintendents, planners. It's a pretty considerable distribution list to get a notification to the department that you're interested. We put it in our intended use plan. We work with the APA to get the funding, and so that's just generally the timeline. The other thing I wanted to mention I put up here is the fiscal sustainability principal forgiveness loan. That's the other incentive that we're offering now, and the cap doesn't require any match, but the FSP does require up to a 50% match, but the loan amount is $50,000 for a total of $100,000. This works really well in conjunction with the cap because it's essentially an asset management plan. You may have information already, but you may need more. Age, condition of structures, pipes, electrical, elevations of those structures. It's really important to have that good data when you're looking at past flood levels and future for the prioritization process. And the outcome of these projects is to have an implementation plan and schedule, and we start to align different funding sources for each of those next steps. So the last one I wanted to talk about here is, doesn't need too much introduction. I think everybody already knows about the Coastal Community Grant Program, so I'm speaking a little bit on behalf of others here, but DEP has certainly been a partner on that project, on these projects, and more so recently. NOAA funding to the Maine Coastal Program and administered by Maine Planning Assistance Program and Department of Ag, Conservation, and Forestry. Ruta Dennis is out here. I know she was already had a shout out earlier, but she's back there. Please, talk to her. I'm happy to answer questions too. This awards programs under this program for planning, design, implementation to improve water quality. These are all the eligible areas: increase resiliency and adaptation to erosion and flooding, conserving coastal habitat, promoting sustainable development, and enhancing the coastal dependent economy while preserving natural coastal resources. So really been a primary funding source for vulnerability assessments for communities, particularly in the coastal areas to sea level rise and coastal hazards. The total awards of this program just for resiliency, the total awards for this program have been, I have over $1.8 million since 2012, since FY12, and for resiliency alone, it's over $600,000. So a lot of the projects that get talked about, I think folks are familiar with. CCG has sort of been a key part of that conversation to get it started. The next round will be in spring of 2020. So please be on the lookout for that. There's more specifics on the link here, and then I just want to mention the case studies for all these projects are on the DACF webpage. And so if you're looking for transferable lessons, if you're looking for what your neighbors might be doing, there's great case studies there to start connecting the dots with other neighbors. And that's pretty much it. My last sort of concluding thought here is that, there are programs out there where we've added resiliency as a criteria to that program, like in the transportation bond example. And then there's other examples where we've looked at our innovative ways of using our existing programs, like CWSRF or Coastal Communities grants, to make it more foundational. So you can think about funding for resiliency as a co-benefit or a core part of the program. And so just a few examples that kind of speak to that, and maybe what more to come ahead. I think that pretty much summarizes it. Yeah.
Well, we have time for maybe one pressing question. Nathan will be around for the rest of the afternoon. Anybody at this point? Great. Thank you so much, Nathan. That's really helpful. Really helpful.
I put together a funding matrix, which I think we'll share at some point, maybe after with the materials. So it's got more about these programs and a whole bunch of other state programs that are either direct or indirect, could be used for resiliency. So we'll continue to populate that. Thank you.
Great. So we're going to move on to the next panel, and it will be a similar format as to the one that we just enjoyed. And I will turn the mic back over to Brian.
Thank you, and I'm going to call my fellow panelists on up. Yes, yes, this is the financing panel. All right, so we're almost there. Got about an hour left to go here, but I think maybe this is the panel that everybody has been waiting for all day long. It's what's on the bleeding edge here? What can we do? What can we look forward to as far as some strategies? What can we start to seed in conversations around the state? We're very fortunate to be joined by our Transportation Commissioner today. Thanks for making the time to be here. We're going to start off with Andrea Smith, who is the Director of Tax Incentive Programs for DECD, and then we'll hear from the Commissioner, and Mr. Levy and Mr. Colgan do not need introductions again. So, Andrea.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Andrea Smith, and I serve as the Director of Tax Incentive Programs at DECD. I'm not going to go through the litany of programs that we have. I'm really thought today we should focus on those where I feel they have, certainly can speak to the subject we've been talking about, primarily around municipal tax increment financing, around the Northern Border Regional Commission, and certainly we'll touch on Community Development Block Grant. All of those programs are housed within DECD. I serve as the program manager for Northern Border Regional Commission. Heather Johnson, the commissioner of DECD, is the governor's alternate. So as you heard earlier today from the gentleman from South Thomaston, the MBRC is an available program to a number of communities throughout Maine. There's only a few counties that are not eligible. And then certainly talking about the municipal TIF program, does everybody in the room know what a municipal TIF program is or has heard of it before? If I could just get a show of hands of people who are aware. Sweet. Okay, good. So I'm not going to get into the nuances of really, if you understand basically what a TIF can do or how a TIF is created. I think the message I've learned today and what I continue to hear, which I will be bringing back to my department, is how we can listen and learn and grow. Some of the programs we have certainly have been on the books for a long time. They're doing great things. Is there ability for them to do more? And that's what I think the questions probably will drive that conversation when we all get done talking about what it is communities need. And I think my commissioner and certainly the work that she has been doing since she came on board with us is to work with other departments and really collaborate and try to combine resources. Being asked to be on this panel is how I actually got introduced to Nate. Never even talked to him before, and we're going to be talking further. I think state, I think state departments can really work together well, and I think that makes us better for helping communities when they need something. So that's really kind of what I'm going to focus on today, and I think I'll just wait for the questions because I think that will probably be more helpful than me rambling about what programs do or where they might be helpful. Who's next, Bruce?
So we're fortunate to be joined by Commissioner Van Note today. He spent yesterday with the Climate Council at the kickoff, and so thank you for your leadership on that, and we're excited to hear from you today.
Happy to be a part of the coveted past 3 p.m. on Friday on a beautiful day. I thank all of you who are still here. It's certainly a gorgeous day. When I was researching, for this presentation, I kind of scratched my head a little bit. We don't have any really big resiliency programs funded right now at DOT. Why am I being... Oh, because we have a lot of money, and let's get a piece of that. So I'm going to go through, I only have 10 slides. I'll go through them pretty quick. You'll see the first 9 slides basically say, we don't have a climate resiliency program right now. But the last slide is the one I would call, opportunities, because I think things are changing, and there are opportunities. So I'll leave with that. So I think yesterday at the Climate Council, they said, you've heard from scientists, and they give you bad news and are boring, that kind of stuff, and then you get into other people. We're engineers, which if you watch The Big Bang Theory, Wolowitz, kind of look, we're not scientists, but we're engineers with all the strengths and weaknesses that come with that, which is we're data-driven, and we fix things. And so the first 9 slides, I apologize in advance, they'll look like tales of woe. That's only because one of our primary core values is integrity, just to tell you what's going on, what's real about the transportation system. But then I will close because I honestly do believe that there are opportunities in the future. So for the first slide, which button is it? That one. Very nice. I have the honor and privilege. This is one of those jobs that it is one of the toughest jobs you'll ever love. But I absolutely do love it. We have a great state, and I am honored and privileged to represent 1,800 people that care a lot and make a difference. So you always have to go through basic mission stuff. I looked at the Island Institute mission yesterday, and I believe in those things. So I'll talk of what our stated mission is, and then we'll get to end of kind of DOT's reality. You can find any one of 50 DOT mission statements that will be similar to this if you go around the country. And this one is to responsibly provide our customers the safest and most reliable transportation system possible. Most of them stop there. But we added a few years ago, given available resources, because we had to be being honest. We weren't getting everything done that we were supposed to, so we changed our mission. Next, we have 3 very simple goals. Manage the existing system. You notice a lot of people think that is fix existing roads. That is not what that says. Manage the existing system. Support economic opportunity and build trust, because we can't do anything unless people trust what we're doing. DOT does have a big job. They include over 8,800 miles of highway, over 2,900 bridges, 3 major ports, 35 publicly funded airports. Yes, a lot of them are strips. There's only 6 commercial and 3 you've ever probably flown out of. 337 miles of state rail lines, 22 public transit providers that have over 450 buses, a ferry service that the Island Institute, I'm sure, is very well aware of, and so am I, with 6 island, Penn Bay and Blue Hill Bay island communities, 68 route miles, and 54 park and ride lots. And yes, I could do many more slides about all the various assets we take care of, but I think that's enough. And then I don't even have the slide in there, but the reason I'm here is that you have a lot of money. How much money do you have? Where is it all? And I'll just give you the overall. We expend roughly $675 million a year. Where does that money come from? Roughly 42% from state fuel taxes and vehicle fees, about 33% from federal funds, a full 20% from various forms of bonding now. And you add that up and you'll see that it's a few single percent that... So what do we do with this whole state? Very sparsely, prioritize, then prioritize again. We have classified every single highway in the state as priority 1 through 5. 1 through 4 is state responsibility in some kind. Priority 5 are the local roads. When you go through 1 through 4, you'll say, you only take care of 39% of the miles in the state? That is correct. By the way, that's very high by national standards. Most state DOTs are only 12 to 20%. So that's actually, and you would expect it with our municipal form of government and no real strong county government. That's where it's done in other places. but it's 39% of the miles, but it's 87% of the traffic. So our municipal partners take care of an awful lot of miles that don't carry that much traffic, which if you're, establishing roles and responsibilities makes intuitive sense. Yes, we've set customer service levels on every single road, and we rate them A through F. They've, for things that you'd expect, safety, the condition of the road is what most people think of. That's a bumpy road. No, it's like, has there been accidents on that bumpy road? We ask those questions. And service. I mean, you have a posted road in the middle of a beautiful, highway, but with a posted bridge. You don't have a corridor that works for the economy. And those customer service levels do vary by priority. And then, yes, okay, what are our goals? We have statutorily set goals of what we're trying to establish. We're not getting it done. We're not getting it anywhere near done. I don't expect anyone to be able to see that, but I just provide there in case anyone gets the PowerPoint later and wants to drill down. But the takeaways on that are that we have $200 million a year short. Out of that $670 million, roughly 60% is capital. Of that 60%, about 20% is for design and management to it. So you're roughly talking about $360 million a year to spend on the core highway and bridge program. We're 200 short on getting what we need done. You may have heard one of my first official acts as new commissioner was to preside over a 30% price spike increase in Maine, which Maine is dirigo in this regard. There is upward prices throughout the country, but Maine is kind of out there on its own right now. The causes are varied, but workforce shortage and number of contractors. Charlie, how am I doing on that? Whenever Charlie nods, I'm feeling very comfortable. I'll move on. So, had to cut $60 million out of that program. And, it wasn't that hard to me. I was just like, okay, what are we going to do? Took some flack, and I said, didn't I read in commissioner school somewhere you can't spend money you don't have? Isn't that a problem? So, but know at that need that you calculate it, that assumes that we continue to get $100 million a year of general fund geo bonding every year. That's baked in the cake. It also assumes that we continue to be very successful with discretionary federal grants to the tune of $25 million a year. That's a highway and bridge total. Multimodal needs like ferries and all those things are in a separate bucket but not included in that number. So if you include that, it would go up. If you wanted to set a policy that a lot of people think that we're a little over-reliant on bonding and we should be using more cash instead of bonding, tack that on to that need. And currently, there's simply no program for climate resiliency. How we do it is similar to, you have the culvert program, what we called it, that we just heard. And notice that's part of the transportation bond. There's a reason that's part of the transportation bond. That passes every year. And I looked at the legislators here and stuff. If that had been a standalone $5 million climate resiliency bond, not so much. So what we do is we don't have a set program. We have a factor where we put in, obviously what are the needs for flow. So sea level rise is part of that on any piece of infrastructure that we do. But we only consider it when it comes due for another reason. It's not like we're saying, if that thing has life, we're waiting until it doesn't have life anymore. And if sea level rise is the reason that doesn't have life later, so it's responsive. It's not proactive. It's not a set plan, although we have the data. So you add that all up in our reality. Here's our real mission. We're doing the best we can with what we have. And that is essentially what we're charged to do. And I'll talk about a Blue Ribbon Commission talking about funding. But at that place, I just said our job currently is to competently manage the slow decline of the transportation system. Inspiring. Isn't that something? We don't use that one for the employee thing. Yeah. But it's the truth. And we competently do it because, am I worried about bridges falling down, people getting hurt? Nope. Why? Because we inspect them and we will close them before it hurts anybody. Again, not inspiring, but when you're just doing triage for safety, those are the kind of things you do. So, sorry about that. That's the Oliver Twist. Please, may I have some, kind of portion of the program? But there are opportunities, and I think that we're at a transition point. You just heard, obviously, about the $5 million, we call it the culvert thing that's put on our bond. That's administered by DEP. We fully support that. Only one thing, though, my chief engineer, Joyce Taylor, would like to say, please make sure someone engineers it at some point, because a couple of these things have opened up and we have to post them as soon as they're open. That's not what we want to do there. But I think you do have an enlightened Maine DOT on this topic. We have a real coastal consciousness. For me, myself, I grew up in Bath. Home city of ships, salt water is anything salt, wet and salty, sounds good to me. And so yes, that includes lots of things other than coastal infrastructure, but we follow data. We are just, engineers are just show me the data. The geologist yesterday talking about sea level rise, and I'm just going, okay, there it is. There's the number. Now we'll hit it. And we have a partnership mentality by necessity. How do we solve this problem? We also have an MPI program, a municipal partnership program, that is for infrastructure. It only has like a $1 million project cap on it. So if you have a piece of infrastructure in your town, and it's a 50-50 program with municipalities. It's largely a no questions asked kind of thing. You get an engineer, say you're going to make a piece of infrastructure better. We're kind of like the bank. It's there. It hasn't been used for coastal resiliency type projects, but it's a pretty open eligibility thing. If it's infrastructure, and make sure you talk about infrastructure in your goals and stuff like that while you apply. There is a Blue Ribbon Commission talking about transportation funding solutions that's ongoing right now. This is when that inspiring revised mission statement came out of competently managing the slow decline. They are talking about trying to find ways to get additional funding for transportation. It is largely supported, a group of bipartisan people that are not the Transportation Committee, they're not the usual suspects, talking about it, looked at it and said, we don't have any doubt that there's a need and that you will use it well. Well, those are the first two hurdles you got to get over before you find money. And while that's going on, there could be opportunities when we're talking additional funding. And I'll close where you started. The Climate Council ended yesterday, the first day. I think this is going to change some consciousness about things. There could be other funding programs, bond programs or others. One thing we do know about at DOT is state bonds. We're very adept at state bonds. We are experts on state bonds. And so if there was some kind of program that, was another teamwork thing, like the 5 that was tacked on, there may be opportunities there. So with that, thank you for all staying, and thanks for everything you do, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I think I just had a lesson in how to deliver bad news with humility and humor. Thank you.
Good job.
All right, David Levy is up next, and he's going to dig into some of the new and shiny objects in the world of financing for us.
All right. Okay, I'm going to stand so I can actually see what I'm talking about here. It might help. So I led the financing piece of the Climate Ready Boston chunk here. And even though this is meant to be, I know, the new and shiny and innovative financing session, it should be said that most of the large-scale funding has actually come from very conventional sources. So Miami, I think 2 years ago now, approved a $400 million bond. San Francisco, that's joint earthquake and ocean, sea level rise stuff, was about $300 million, again a straight bond, and the largest one, $2.5 billion, Harris County, which is mainly Houston. They've spent the last year arguing about how to spend the money and how to divide it up. I think just last month they tried to set some priorities. But the point is that there are all these proposals for new things, but a lot of them aren't really coming to fruition because, as I said before, state and city bonds are very, very cheap forms of funding. They do rely on property taxes, and there's a problem. Certainly for us in Boston, nearly half the property isn't taxed. It's universities and hospitals and government buildings, so it's not a very fair way necessarily. Not everybody is paying their share. The fundamental problem here's a little picture of East Boston, right, and the plan for the waterfront that Kleinfelder did. And the question is, who pays for this? You might think that the folks right in the immediate vicinity, the buildings themselves, they should be paying a piece, and that would be district-level funding that would be primarily private, either through a TIF, a tax improvement district, or in Boston they're playing around with a BID, a business improvement district type of model. I mean, the problem with the tax improvement financing is as I said before, we're funding infrastructure to prevent an erosion of values. It doesn't necessarily, unless it's coupled with other things, which you hope it might be, it won't necessarily improve the tax base. But the Boston financial people don't like that anyway because they don't like their tax revenues being earmarked for a particular cause here. They like to protect their autonomy. But then can we go to Worcester? Can we go to people inland and ask them to fund part of it? We make the case, of course, that Boston, if this is East Boston, if that floods, it floods the tunnels, it puts the airport out of action, and Boston is part of the economic engine for the region. Worcester doesn't like to hear that, right? But still, we're trying to make the case. What are the indirect benefits? And they're not easy to measure in any objective way, the indirect benefits as you go out in concentric circles. And what about Maine? What about Connecticut? Should they be funding a piece of each other? How are these costs socialized in some way is a question. And as we look across the financial instruments, just in a couple of minutes, I haven't got time to go into detail, but it's important to understand different ones have different functions. A bond just spreads the payments out over time. It also transfers the risk, because if you build something that protects a building, you move the risk from the building, and it's now the investors who are bearing some financial risk that the city won't be able to pay the money back. But it doesn't align incentives. Some other instruments here, like a carbon tax or a water tax or a fee, help to align incentives because it might help to reduce emissions, or if you put a fee on insurance, casualty and property insurance, as is being spoken about in New York, still not enacted, but they're talking about a couple of % on insurance bills, that would help perhaps to incentivize private building owners to improve resilience. So you have to think about the different functions of the various funding mechanisms as well. I haven't got nearly time to go through all of these. I'm just going to mention the first one here, risk pricing and resilience metrics. The insurance industry is jumping into this and developing some metrics at the building level that will, and it's actually been mandated in some southern states, that insurance companies have to give you a discount if you meet a certain building metric. It's like an extension of the LEED system that accounts for building level resistance. You might also get in the future a cheaper mortgage if your building is, so that the bank doesn't get wiped out from their loan. And it's a little similar to in Europe, when you sell a house, you have an inventory, a ranking of the energy efficiency, and that's also meant to affect the purchase price of the house as well. So it's meant to help the property market wake up to these risks. Same thing for resilience risks. We could potentially use that as an incentive here. What we were basically advocating for in Boston, in order to spread this out, is a layered funding scenario. You probably can't see the numbers from the back, but the idea is a district, the owners of buildings, commercial, residential, probably couldn't afford more than maybe 20% of the total cost of, obviously it varies from area to area, but the total cost, they can afford a slice of it, but the state's going to have to pick up some. The Fed already is picking up in most areas, all these different programs, but that's unlikely to increase very much. So we need to be thinking more seriously about a state-level fund. Where does that state money come from? Well, potentially carbon tax, higher gasoline taxes. Massachusetts already has one of the lowest gasoline taxes, actually, in New England. Maybe a state-level water fee. That's a little trickier because it's districts, cities that collect the money, but it's that there is the MWRA, there is a state-level authority, and a water fee would spread it out instead of being property taxes. The idea of a district here, see this DRI, dry, keep you dry, a district resilience improvement plan, potentially with a risk-based charge rather than just a property tax-based charge. And the idea would be to negotiate payments as well from other infrastructure that's protected behind the front line, and so get everybody to contribute who's protected to some degree. Just one very quick note about the map here of East Boston. Notice how the plan is to protect everything down to the last wharf, which doesn't make sense. If you remember, Boston from the early map has grown, and it might make sense to fill a little bit more or to retreat to a more defensible line that it has some higher elevation. But it turns out to be quite expensive to protect it down to the last wharf, but again, that's more of a political decision and isn't necessarily the best thing, but that's on the table right now. Privately owned buildings, new construction, there is a business model for building in a more resilient way and increasing the reputational value and higher rents, lower insurance costs, and it's meant to more or less pay for itself from some of the case studies that I've seen. On the other hand, resilient buildings, you might be on stilts like this one here, but as Goldman Sachs found out in New York, if people can't get to your building, then having power doesn't help very much. So this is the GE building that was planned and then cancelled. GE never came to Boston. One innovative idea, there's sort of a play on cat bonds here. How long have I got? Down to 1 minute, yeah. There is these very fancy resilience bonds as well that I won't go into, but this is a standard resilience bond idea, is just issuing a bond to pay for some improvements in the city. And the idea is that if you couple that with insurance, maybe a cat bond, you can reduce the bond rating or improve the bond rating, let's say, and keep the interest costs down. And the insurance will ensure that the city stays solvent if there's a major, and ensure that the project gets completed. So that helps to keep the bond relatively inexpensive. But on the other side, it works the other way as well. By investing in resilience for the city, you can keep the cat bond relatively cheap because you're going to be reducing the amount of damage. And so hopefully that would pull down the cost of the cat bond. A cat bond, for those of you, does anyone here not know what a cat bond is? Catastrophe bond? Only one, 2 hands. Okay, so I won't spend too much time explaining that. But in the past, right, the city, we'll wrap it up, the city has issued really cheap bonds, 2-3%, but if the investors are going to bear some risk that they're going to lose some money, then the city might have to pay out 5%, but on the other hand, they'll get money back if a defined event happens. Problem is that investors have been chasing yield and have been discounting the probability of these events happening. As they ramp up, the price of cat bonds is falling, and investors are going to be demanding much higher rates of return. So it's not exactly it's not obvious that this is going to be a great solution either. But cat bonds can be very, very low transaction cost, especially the parametric bonds. But there's other stories about those I won't have time to get into because the wrap it up sign is up there. Thank you.
Thank you, David. When we were pulling this panel together, Dr. Colgan offered a back cleanup for us, and so we're going to give him the final say here, and then we'll open it up to questions.
So I want to talk about 2 things. One is, why is Bruce here?
Yes. He said the same thing.
Because I suggested it. And the reason I suggested it is because almost all of the work that I'm doing in California on adaptation is being funded by Caltrans. It's not being funded by kind of a general purpose appropriations. It's being funded by Caltrans. Now, Caltrans is the DOT in California. Now, admittedly in California, we have put an 18-cent a gallon gas tax hike in. And last year, we voted to keep it. It was on the ballot to repeal it, and it was kept by 60% of the voters.
Hold that thought.
So one of my purposes here is to get Bruce more money.
Get some.
Which will come to my next point in a minute. The reason that the transportation agency is so critical is because they are literally almost everywhere the front lines of vulnerability. Recall the presentation this morning about Vinyl Haven and the criterion that literally the road gets washed out and people can't get to the hospital, can't get the ambulances, can't get to people. All of that is micro vulnerabilities that don't show up until the crisis occurs. And it all depends on the planning about the transportation system. One of the things I said this morning was, you're already doing adaptation. You're just not doing it very well.
Project by project.
So what I want to do with respect to DOT is to say, we have to get them more money. And they have to be at the front lines of adaptation planning because they are at the front lines of vulnerability. It's worse than Bruce mentioned, because remember what I said about mitigation? Remember what I said about the imperative of getting our carbon emissions down? The front line of that is the transportation system. You are not going to run DOT on gas taxes when everybody's driving an EV. So the imperative is enormous. The political resistance is, alas, equally large. But I cannot overemphasize how the transportation planning and the transportation system is at the front line of much of the catalyst for what needs to be done. And that's why I wanted Bruce here, because I want to get him more money, and I want to get him to doing the adaptation work that he is already doing a lot better.
This was not coordinated.
It was not, yeah, honest. I want to just pick up on a few other threads that have come out through the day. What are some things that you can do in your community? What are some? I have a few tips for how to go about doing this. One is about sea level rise modeling. There are a lot of models out there. The details of them are pretty interesting to numbers geeks like me. You know, an economist, you mentioned what an engineer is. Well, an economist is a guy who is pretty good with numbers but lacks the personality to be an actuary. So, you know, I really get off on some of the finer points in the modeling of sea level rise. But what I want to, without getting into all of those details, pay particular attention to what is being modeled. Is it simply a bathtub shift in water levels? What's the baseline? Is it high water or low water? Is it the year 2000 or in some other base year? What is being analyzed? Is it tidal inundation? Is it storm inundation? The difference between tidal inundation and storm inundation can be a factor of 5 to 10. So you may look at models that show tidal inundation, and a storm surge is going to be many times that size. So the actual risks are much higher than what you're being shown in those models. So know what the model is doing. There's ample documentation on all of it. All you got to ask is, what's the base year? What is being shown? And is the true risk of the combination of sea level rise and storms being shown? Secondly, what's your capital plan? Okay, 90% of Maine communities have no capital plan. Time to get one, because that capital plan is the place where you can do most of the work, most of the heavy lifting on your infrastructure. What's your insurance? And you got to think about what's the insurance on the public sector and on the private sector. How many homes in your community are covered by the flood insurance program? Big question. You can find out from FEMA. Have a strategy for insurance and reinsurance. reinsurance is insurance on top of insurance. We do not pay enough attention to the reinsurance idea. It is an idea that can be developed in much more sophisticated ways, like with catastrophe bonds, than what we're already doing. What are the boundaries of the problem? In dialogues that we have around the world about ocean-related issues, increasingly people who are concerned about the oceans do not use the term the oceans. They use the term the ocean. There's only one of them. It spans the whole globe. It connects everything. So when you look out across Belfast Harbor and Penobscot Bay, it's the same ocean in Casco Bay. It's the same ocean in Monterey Bay. Where are the boundaries of the effects that you need to pay attention to? Yes, there are local jurisdictional issues to be dealt with, but it's all one ocean. The final point I'll make is simply to repeat something that a number of people have said, which is communities, this is a difficult problem that most people have not yet fully understood. Nobody completely understands it, but most people have still not really grasped the gravity of the situation. The necessity, I fear, is for more meetings. I don't think there's a way to get around it. Now, you can do some of the meetings online, and you can have mediated things, but I'm afraid you're going to have more meetings. Because you're going to have to get people interested and engaged in all of this, and they're going to have to see it as an issue that is important to them in order to get them to pay attention to what is a very complex and difficult set of issues, which are manageable, but not quickly. So those are just a few tips from somebody who's been working with communities around the country about how to respond to all of this.
I'll slip you a 20 later, too.
Thank you all very much. My first question is going to go back to Charlie. This morning you talked a bit about the Finance Authority of Maine, and we have other financial institutions in the state, the Municipal Bond Bank and the Bureau of Insurance. How would you see those organizations and institutions fitting into this conversation, either through the Climate Council or in other ways as we start to develop some of these financial solutions?
As I suggested, no Maine community is going to respond to this on its own. They're going to have to be done collectively, perhaps in regions or statewide. You cannot play in the catastrophe bond, resilient bond, impact bond market at the scale of most Maine communities. They have to be aggregated. Now, fortunately, we already have a mechanism for doing that with respect to the standard municipal bond market, which is the Maine Municipal Bond Bank. That's its purpose, is to aggregate local borrowing for the purpose of accessing municipal finance, municipal bonds. So we have mechanisms to do it, but they are not anywhere near the expertise to deal with these climate-related issues. So that would be one of the first places I would look. I mean, Bruce says they have huge expertise in bonding at DOT, so that's another place to look. But we know how to borrow money. You'll not be surprised at that. But this is a very specialized and innovative and new way of doing things. We need expertise in the state to help the local governments and the state government access those markets. And so that would be one of the prime ways or areas that I would look for state policy to develop a new capacity to access those markets and get some of the funding available through them.
Yeah, just to clarify, we have expertise in obtaining bonds. actual issuance of them. And one of the reasons is because we do long-term capital plans. And when they say, well, what are you going to use it for? We go ka-funk and put it on the table. That's what we do.
Andrea, when you and I spoke on the phone a couple of weeks ago, we talked a bit about the state's strategic plan for economic development. And as you've been learning recently about some of the resilience challenges, how do you see what we've been talking about today informing that strategic plan?
That's a good one. That wasn't on the list. So I would say, I think everybody knows the state has undertaken putting together a long-term state economic development plan. And there's been ongoing conversations throughout the state, learning sessions, listening sessions, and really I feel a lot of what has happened today is similar in that there is a way to learn from everybody, and different communities are experiencing some of the exact same challenges, and how do we work together to try to help people resolve those challenges, maybe something that worked in another community. And I think the fact that we have this climate council, that it's been made a priority of this administration, is really huge. I think that's going to be what drives Maine's opportunities. And it may mean that we do develop new programs, but it also means that we are looking at some of the programs we already have, and as Charlie has said, how do we do them better, or how can we work better together as multiple state agencies, all trying to make good things happen in communities and work with local people and really rise to the challenge.
Thanks. Commissioner, for you, how is DOT ensuring that what you're doing with what you've got is being allocated equitably around the state?
We follow the math. I mean, we actually, Maine is fortunate in that some other states have actual legislative approval of work plans. Right, our neighbor in New Hampshire has an executive council that actually approves their 10-year capital plan. That's not how it works in Maine. The Division of Labor is generally, we put out long-term plans and we publish them. You can get online on a map viewer and click in your municipality or maps of priority corridors or by mode, and you can see what the long-term plan is. And and that's based on what we just talked about there, the priority system, the customer service levels, and obviously safety is a paramount concern. So we have a system. We have a capital system, and what we say when we go to the legislature is we're not asking you to fund individual boxes on the conveyor belt. We're asking you to fund the conveyor belt. So it just keeps going one by one by one. And because if all you do is say this money is for this project, there are never enough projects in 1 year to motivate a legislature of 186 people with with all those districts. It just doesn't work. So what you're funding is a system, a plan, a long-term priority system with customer service levels. And if someone wants to have a debate, it's amazing how rare it happens. It says, I think your priority's wrong here. I think your customer service level is wrong here. We're open to that. Okay. We look at it, and we've changed it before. But then you're funding a system, and I think following on Charlie's thoughts, this is still too new to have like this system. It's too early in problem definition to have that kind of long-term conveyor belt kind of thing, but that's where you need to get to.
Thanks. David, question for you. You had a slide up there about layers of programs and policies. Could you talk a little bit more about that? And in an ideal world, how would those programs all sort of nest together, and what would the goals be for designing that? And then how do we get there in a non-ideal world?
Yes, there's a lot there, and in a way it is kind of hypothetical. At the state level, I think the most important thing, there is already federal funding and a whole range of sources for that, and the city is taking some responsibility, and it's cities that have been issuing bonds. So it's the state piece that is in some ways the toughest one, and in Massachusetts right now, the governor's got a proposal to increase quite substantially the property transfer tax. I wrote an op-ed in the Boston Globe. I don't think it's a grand idea because it's targeting a very narrow group of folks who are buying and selling properties in a particular year. We've been living in our house 25 years, so I wouldn't have paid into this fund for ages. But then there's a fight between the governor and the state house wants to have a more general resilience bond issued, general funding bond. But it's very hard politically to be pushing gasoline taxes or the idea of a small water fee. And I don't know. I mean, we're going to have to see. Right now, it's just sort of up in the air. I think a more specific proposal about a water fee, in a broader sense, I think we can often look to energy efficiency and think of some parallels in ways that we could potentially fund resilience. So in Mass, I don't know if Maine has it, there's a very small surcharge on electricity bills, the Mass Save program, and that goes into an energy efficiency fund, and we just upgraded last year from oil to gas and put in 95%, these very high efficiency heating boiler system, and we've got a chunk of money for that and a zero interest loan, and that all comes out of. You could do a similar thing with water, with a small charge on water. I say water, it could be coming from a gasoline tax, but there could be a similar fund for resilience that would provide free audits, cheap loans for residential housing. Whether that would be enough for commercial and larger scale buildings is a little unclear. How to coordinate it? Yeah, I mean that's probably going to be the city applying for state funding, applying for federal funding, but at the district coordinate it. We lack the governance systems really at the district level in the city, and we lack the governance. Some of the mechanisms at the regional level. We've got state, we've got city, but the regional, Metro, Boston, and other regions, I think we're lacking some of the governance to pull those things together. So that's a future challenge. Thank you.
Thanks. Andrea, one more for you. What role might exist for the state in helping communities to, this is back to the earlier question I asked the other panel about protecting property tax revenues when they're trying to perhaps discourage or make some kind of limits on how we're developing in coastal and vulnerable areas?
So I would say it gets tough when we start talking about residential development. Certainly, the way that most of our programs are really focused on economic development, and I think our challenge is to look at certainly those two are attached at the hip, and in order for positive economic development to happen, you need positive communities, strong communities, and I think our challenge will be to look at the programs as to how they can adapt in those situations where maybe right now they don't.
All right, we're going to turn it over to you all. Questions? Yes?
I have a compound question for both Commissioner Andrea as well as Andrea. And one of them, so two programs, the Maine DOT Map Viewer is an awesome tool, so kudos. And then the CDBG program, you knew I was going to ask you this, Andrea. I'm wondering if both of those programs, if there was a way of identifying some climate resiliency factors or ratings that could feed into prioritizing where you spend your money in both of those programs, but in the entire DOT budget.
So how do we start feeding adaptation and resiliency priorities into not just entire departments, but CDBG and the map viewer at DOT?
You'd see it in the map viewer as it is expressed in how Maine DOT spends their money. I'm still after the whole budget.
Good luck with that. The map viewer would just be another layer, right? I mean, that's a GIS system, and you put on another layer, and we actually do have some of those layers that we can use internally for that kind of thing. But so that could easily be put on there. How that translates into reallocation of money, that's a policy decision. And I wouldn't be. I'm the Department of Transportation. So I focus on transportation infrastructure. The overlap with, almost those pictures on Camp Ellis, that's a road, right? You know, that's a road that's washing away first. The houses are on the other side. So could that be some kind of policy statement that someone tells us to do that? I will be saying, if before you do that, I'm $200 million short just taking care of what I already got, allocating all $675 million for climate adaptation. I will tell you that will be a policy loser at the State House.
Meaning that you could save money by doing it in certain ways. That was more.
Well, anything with the word save money, my ears get this big. I honestly think what will happen is a rising tide floats all boats. I think there is an opportunity. I'm not advocating for this in any way, but we've already been at meetings where we're over at the Emergency Management Agency and said, we think you should take care of dams, you know. And why? Simply because they think we have all this money, and that's not the reason, but it's just because if we had a dam program, we'd get some damn money, you know. We would, and we'd sit there and do metrics and figure out and prioritize them and do them in order. So right now I just ask, could you please identify every dam that could wash out a piece of transportation infrastructure, which there are several, you know, an overlap there. We could do a similar thing with climate and seek additional funding. I mean, I can't honestly say the only way we're going to be funding, as Charlie says, we're not doing it very well. We're doing it reactively. Oh, look, this road's washing out. I guess we should make it higher now. You know, yep. This bridge needs replacement. I guess we better make it a little bit taller and a little bit longer to deal with sea level rise. I mean, it's not. We just follow the numbers. So, anyway, we're not against taking on more work. We're against taking on work without funding to do it.
So I just want to make sure I understood your question, Judy. So when you were talking about CDBG, are you talking about scoring and when we look at projects and taking into account? Okay, is that?
I mean, you're working on the program statement right now.
Yes, we are.
Climate resilience factors as a mechanism to make choices around public infrastructure planning.
Okay. So Judy is correct. The Community Development Block Grant Program is currently working on its program statement for 2020. I guess what I would say is I think it's an opportunity for multiple state agencies to have conversations about climate change challenges. I think that's the conversations when we sit around the table with the folks from DEP and USDA and all these other funders that go into some of these programs is it's something that we're now talking about where maybe we weren't before. So I think probably when there's an opportunity to comment on the program statement, I think it would be good if that suggestion was made. I think the more we have the conversation and we put that out there. I think the state agencies actually work really well together when we talk about doing a lot of these public infrastructure projects. Can we do it better? And with maybe looking at it with a little different lens and some additional knowledge, which conversations like today are certainly driving. I think there's an opportunity for Maine to do some great things and try to address these challenges with some of the programs and putting our collective heads together as multiple state agencies, not just one doing one thing. Does that help?
Great. Yes.
I wanted to mention a project to the commissioners that's actually pending with the Municipal Partnership Initiative program right now from the town of Sedgwick, which is an example of a coastal related project. And I want to mention it because the funding aimed at infrastructure from DOT that were awarded from that program would bring in more than one-to-one match from a mitigation source aimed at fish passage and
That was a really great comment that I'm not going to be able to pull all together, but I will say that finding co-benefits and aligning co-benefits for single projects can bring together different funding streams to have impact. Thank you.
Well, just if that was lobbying for that particular application, that's not how that program works, as you know. No, it's honestly a first come, first serve thing. That's one of the reasons it's so popular right now. This was back when we realized this kind of tale of woe we had. Our answer was going to be, because we prioritize so much, we're going to spend all our money on priority 1s and 2s highways. And if you happen to be a priority 3 or 4, good luck. We're not going to touch anything forever. We had to have some kind of program that allows you to have an answer. And it's strictly so if you get in the queue, it will happen. It will happen. All it has to do is be eligible.
Great, thanks. Last question, sir, in the back.
Commissioner, in Portland, South Portland, we're doing a climate plan, and very preliminary indications are that in order to replace our fossil fuels, we're going to need to double or triple our electrical use. And it's the type of electricity is the more peak. So we're going to need a lot more juice, and we need to get it to Portland, South Portland, because we're just not going to be able to generate enough of it.
Interstate highways.
Distributed generation-wise. So I'm just wondering, are you guys thinking about DOT providing corridors through new transmission lines, as part of projects in the future?
So the question was around, as we switch to new electrical sources, are we thinking about new transmission lines through the Department of Transportation?
Yes, something as popular as the gas tax. New transmission lines through populated southern Maine areas where the per capita lawyer population is higher. Yeah, that's the answer is simply, though, yes, we actually were a part of a conversation about using the interstate corridors for transmission lines, but the only way that it really kind of got over the policy humps was buried DC lines, in the right-of-way, which, as you may know, require a step up and step down of a cool couple billion, just hugely expensive. Add $1 billion to the cost of anything for stepping up and stepping down to AC power. The answer is we're engineers. We'll do whatever makes sense for stuff long term. I would not presume to be ahead of the planning apparatus of Portland or South Portland, however. I'm sure you guys are going to be at a cutting edge. But in terms of using our infrastructure for something more than it is, very open to that. Why wouldn't we be? But we do note that anytime we put up a sign or cut a tree, the phone rings off the hook. The phone rings off the hook. So we will need help to do that. But if it's part of a long-term plan, that's what we're about. We like it.
Great. So I think that's how we're going to wrap up this panel. Please join me in thanking our panelists for being here today. And I'm going to turn it back over to Liz to send us on our way.
Great. Okay, I'll let you guys have a chance to decamp. Super. Come on down. Great job. Okay, folks, so as it turns out, we are going to conclude this afternoon with the role play that was supposed to start the afternoon. Let me get out of the way here. I actually have a part in this. I'm so excited. So when we planned ways of presenting the topic of financing for you today, we decided to take you behind the scenes into a town hall of a little flood-prone community, Coastalville, Maine, to watch the dialogue between two people with very specific experience, expertise, and agendas. One of them is Coastalville's town manager in the person of Sarah Cox. In real life, Sarah chairs the Comprehensive Plan Committee in Brooksville, a town of 900 year-round residents. Before that, she served as her longtime coastal community's harbor master, overseeing 53 miles of shoreline. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
Today, as hypothetical Coastalville, Maine's town manager, Sarah needs funding to help her community address sea level rise. It turns out she learned of a new type of consultant, a person who helps town officials make sure they work together to make the town as resilient as feasible against sea level rise, increasingly adverse weather, and coastal storm surges. That's a Chief Resilience Officer. In that role for us today is Alan Kratz. Alan divides his time between Brooksville, across Penobscot Bay, and Hoboken, New Jersey.
Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
In New Jersey, using federal, state, county, and municipal funds, Alan oversaw the floodproofing of the historic Hoboken Public Library. He's now the principal in a firm called Resilience Works that advises communities on funding resilience. Although Sarah needs funding, she's skeptical about obtaining it. Nonetheless, she's agreed to meet Alan. Let's watch.
When I heard you might meet with us, I was skeptical. Still am, but here you are, and you have only 15 minutes to convince me.
Well, thanks for carving out time. Let's see what's possible. First of all, is Coastalville's comprehensive plan up to date? I'm sorry. What's your situation here in Coastalville? I guess that would be the first thing to hear.
Okay, like many other towns, there's no money in our budget for anything but essential operations. Mm-hmm. The Select Board won't authorize a town warrant for new spending. Tax increases are an absolute no. Waterfront industry has died, leaving only a vacant old warehouse. Downtown stores are hurting. Coastal storms and king tides flood the retail district, which really hurts merchants in the summer tourist season. Even high tides and a full moon almost knock out our sewage treatment plant on the water's edge. The causeway into town floods frequently. That it does in Brooksville, too. Seaweed ends up on the wrong side of our coastal road during bad storms.
Understood. Fortunately, state and federal programs and private sector investment can help. So first, is Coastalville's comprehensive plan up to date with a finding of consistency from the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry? Because that's required for some state funding, and towns with a consistency funding will get an extra 10 points when competing for state and certain state funds.
Our plan is almost 15 years out of date. Updating it takes money, and that's tough to find.
So to start, the Island Institute's Shoreup Maine Technical Assistance Fund offers grants of $500 to $10,000 to help communities take steps to address coastal flooding. That's money that can be used for direct infrastructure work and education and planning.
So we could get funding to help us start our comprehensive plan?
Yes, and best of all, unlike most grant programs, this has been a yearly grant program with no application deadline.
That sounds very promising. I'm going to start a list.
And that funding will enhance your credibility when you apply for other grants. You know, early money is like yeast.
I've heard that. Oh my, yes, Emily's list.
Well, that brings up Maine's coastal community grants. In fiscal 2020, that program provided up to $100,000 per project to increase resiliency against erosion and flooding and to enhance coastal dependent economy. So the DACF's Municipal Planning Assistance Program, that administers the grants, and to qualify, again, you need a consistency finding for your comprehensive plan.
Okay, what else?
Well, another goal is to casting a wider net. Let's talk about your downtown's economic challenges. Each year, Maine gets federal funds from HUD for the Community Development Block Grants. Those are awarded competitively, and one objective, as they say, is to, quote, improve deteriorated residential and business districts and local economic conditions.
We certainly could use that sort of help.
And another goal is to provide conditions and incentives for further public and private investments. Here in Coastalville, you could really make a good case that fortifying your harbor from coastal flooding is essential for downtown revitalization. And the maximum from that grant is $300,000.
So you're connecting economic resilience to coastal resilience. Each supports the other?
Yes. So here's an example. You know that old warehouse downtown that's vacant on the waterfront? Is there a historic value to that building?
Oh my, yes. The local historical society got it listed on the National Register of Historic Places and on Maine's register too.
That's great, because this could be ideal for a developer who preserves the historic exterior and adapts the interior for new uses. One of those new uses could be stormwater detention. The developer converts the building, the basement of the building, into a huge bathtub, and it holds excess rainwater from the roof, the sidewalk, and the street that otherwise would flood the street and overload the sewer.
You're kidding. You want water in the basement? We've already got too much water in the wrong place.
Well, actually, it's the right amount of water in the right place temporarily. Excess water in the basement stays there until the sewer can handle it. So better to display and to store and discharge that excess water than letting it do damage elsewhere.
That's certainly new thinking, but I am worried about contaminants in the buildings.
So let's talk about the Environmental Protection Agency's Brownfields program. It provides grants for assessment and remediation. And you in Coastalville could apply for a site-specific assessment grant. They go up to $200,000. At the street level of the warehouse, talking more about your warehouse project, the developer can develop new retail space, and on the top floor, affordable housing.
Ah, housing. That's a sore spot. Do you know how hard it is for people who service our tourist trade to find affordable housing here in Coastalville? We have workers driving in from an hour away during the summer.
Okay, so now we're going to link flood risk reduction and housing and historic preservation in this one building. For financial feasibility, the developer reduces their taxable income by claiming a 20% federal historic tax credit to rehab the building and a 25% state historic credit from the state of Maine.
Okay, this encourages development without using town funds, right?
Right, and the state has additional resources and incentives. Maine Housing administers the National Housing Trust Fund, which is a federal resource that allocates developers money for affordable rental housing in households with extremely low income.
That's very interesting. Historic tax credits and Maine Housing can subsidize development that improves coastal resilience.
That's right, and there's also Maine Housing's revolving loan fund for acquisition program. It lends up to $300,000 to help developers acquire property for affordable housing. And those are projects that qualify for tax credit financing.
What is tax credit financing?
Well, tax credit financing is specifically the federal low-income housing tax credit. And that provides a federal tax credit to developers who reserve a portion of the rental units for low-income renters. And that subsidy can be up to $20,000 for each unit of eligible housing. The other thing that we'll talk about is working hand in hand with low-income housing tax credits are something new under the 2017 tax code. They're called opportunity zones. Now, the low-income housing tax credit really helps a developer defray the initial investment in a project like this. By contrast, opportunity zones allow a developer to defer taxes on future profits. So they work hand in hand. And basically, an opportunity zone is an economically distressed neighborhood. There are 32 of them right now in Maine, 4 of them in coastal communities, Portland, South Portland, Bass, and Belfast. So let's go back to low-income housing tax credits. They work jointly with Maine's Housing's rental loan program. That's a program that provides low-interest, long-term mortgage financing to qualified private and nonprofit developers of affordable housing. Also, the Maine New Markets Tax Capital Investment Program attracts investment capital to low-income communities. It allows investors to receive a tax credit worth 39% of state income taxes and for the equity investments they make in community development enterprises. And here in Maine, our program works in tandem with the federal New Markets Tax Credit, and that provides a 39% credit against federal income.
That's a very helpful list of incentives to achieve housing, economic development, and coastal resilience.
Right. And another way to reduce the cost of a project like this is to get help from nonprofit corporations. For example, technology assistance, technical assistance planning from $25,000 to $100,000 is available from nonprofit corporations like Enterprise Community Partners and the local initiative support corporation called LISC. They provide HUD funding, HUD Section 4 funding, and entities like Enterprise and LISC can really help resiliency planning and provide support staff and other consultant costs to a community. So now let's turn away from our warehouse conversion project where we're talking about public and private financing and look at your wastewater treatment plant. The state's Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund provides low-interest loans to municipalities and quasi-municipal corporations to construct and repair and improve wastewater infrastructure. And there's actually a partnership between the Maine Municipal Bond Bank and the DEP's Division of Water Quality Management.
You said loan, not an outright grant?
Yes, that's true, but that means the Coastalville can borrow at an attractive rate. In 2017, for instance, the average interest rate was 1.4% compared to the prevailing market rate of 3.5%. That's a nice spread.
Well, if we have to spend money, this is as good as it gets for borrowing.
So, yeah, and there's something else you might want to consider that's new on the scene, and this is the Northern Border Regional Commission. This is a new federal-state partnership affecting New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, and Maine, and it awards grants. And in Maine, we got $2.9 million from the commission in 2018. They help economically distressed counties in these states, including states here in Maine, which is really cool.
Wait a minute, let me get caught up on my list. Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, Northern Border Regional Commission.
Right, you've added those, that's good. And as part of adapting your working waterfront to sea level rise, let's talk about the Maine DOT's Small Harbor Improvement Program, SHIP, as an acronym. That can help. SHIP can provide up to $250,000 with a one-to-one local match to improve facilities such as public wharves and piers and landings and boat ramps.
We'll definitely look into that one.
Also consider Coastal Enterprises, Inc., CEI. It's based in Brunswick, and it provides technical and financial assistance to the private sector to help their communities grow good jobs and environmentally sustainable enterprises.
Okay, that definitely goes on my list too.
Right, it's a pretty good list. And let's focus on your waterfront. I think I noticed there's some vacant low-lying land just north of the harbor. Is that a floodplain?
Sure is. It floods whenever there's a heavy rain.
Okay, well, how about the town purchasing that floodplain so that it can operate the way floodplains formerly performed, sponging up excess water and buffering upland areas from flooding?
Hey, you were doing great with grants and low-interest loans and private sector investment, and now you're adding a cost.
Only partially, because DACF administers a land and water conservation fund. It provides matching grants to county, municipal, and tribal governments to acquire and develop public outdoor recreation areas and facilities. And for a project that can provide up to $300,000, that's 50% of the cost. There's a local match, but the nice thing about this is that many philanthropic organizations or nonprofits might want to provide that one-to-one local share rather than you having to do it through tax money or municipal resources. So that's really very appealing.
A public outdoor recreation area and facility on a piece of property that's going to flood?
Yes, but in blue sky conditions, the floodplain is ideal for passive recreation like ball fields and a picnic pavilion and restrooms, all elevated above flood elevation. And when it rains, the floodplain will operate the way nature intended to operate, as a buffering sponge.
Okay, I'll add it to my list.
Similarly, DACF's Bureau of Parks and Lands Recreational Trails Program, it disperses, believe it or not, Federal Highway Administration funds to construct new recreational trails. And because tides and wave action are eroding the floodplain, you might want to apply for funds to stabilize the shoreline with either engineered solutions or vegetation that strengthens the critical edge habitat. So the maximum grant is $50,000, and the project does have to focus on recreation, but because coastal resilience is an issue that affects all sorts of what governments do, it's really worth a try to apply for that funding as well.
Good point. More and more we have to look at every town action through a resilience lens.
Right. And I noticed that the bridge over the creek that feeds into your bay is very close to the water, has a very narrow opening. So you may want to qualify for a Maine DEP stream crossing grant, and you could get up to $95,000 through that program. And one other thing, we've been talking about, we've talked about FEMA. The FEMA pre-mitigation, and I'll emphasize pre-mitigation program, is now a cost-share program in which the feds put up 75% of the cost with a local share of 25% for projects that, as they say, are designed to reduce the risk of loss of life and property from future disasters. That's a new way of thinking. I think that's very important for you to, I guess you're going to add that to your list too.
That is interesting, I agree, and I will add it to my running list.
And speaking of running, I'd better be running too. My 15 minutes are up, so gotta leave.
Do please just stay a few more minutes and summarize this all for me.
Okay, so quickly here, $10,000 from the Island Institute to jumpstart comp planning, Maine Coast Community Grant up to $100,000, Community Development Block Grant $300,000, Northern Border Regional Commission $250,000, $250,000, Small Harbor Improvement Program another $250,000, $300,000 from the Land and Water Conservation Fund, $50,000 from the Recreational Trails Program, and $200,000 from FEMA.
Whee! That's a total of $1.460 million in potential grants. But the town has to match some of those funds.
Well, that's true. But there's a local match, and it's important to know that we've got the $300,000 you'd have to put up for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, $250,000 for the Border Commission, $250,000 for the Small Harbor Fund. All of that totals $800,000. And to upgrade the sewer system, the sewer plant rather, you will incur capital costs, but you can amortize them with a low-cost loan from the state's Clean Water Revolving Fund. So,
oh, that's all very nice, but we still have to come up with money from our taxpayers.
That's true, but I want to point out that, in the dollars we've been talking about, Coastalville actually gets 183% financial return on the local match that gets made. And that return is even higher when you work with philanthropic organizations or other nonprofits and assemble that a local match from other funding sources, like a water conservation district or a public utility, or, as I say, some philanthropic organization that has a common interest with you. The key is that Coastalville receives financial benefits and infrastructure benefits valued at far more than what it spends. So you also gain more than a financial return, and you gain more than physical structures. You're really gaining social resilience, and you're gaining economic resilience.
That's a very good point. I appreciate your giving me the time and for your insights.
Well, you're welcome, and I've relied on a number of colleagues to assemble this information for you, and my motto really is everyone teaches and everyone learns. Thank you.
And that's today's objective. So, round of applause here.
Thank you.
Everyone teaches and everyone learns. We encourage you to look at the email that was sent to you with the list of resources. You'll find links to all the grant programs that were mentioned here during the role play. And we have a few minutes if there are a couple of questions, because we promised to get you out on time, and we will. So any questions from the audience for these two right now? End of the day. Yeah. Yeah, great. Good to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice and bright. You might as well just wait if you want to just sit here while Sam closes. I'm going to turn this over to Sam to close out.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Sarah. This has been a great way to kind of visualize a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And as Charlie said, there's more money out there than we may anticipate. So, 4 things stand out to me today from this meeting. First is that we have some time to plan and prepare our coastal communities. Not much, but some. The second, as we just mentioned, there's more money out there than we might realize. It's just figuring out how to package it and how to best access it. The third is that money should focus first on mitigation where possible because it's cheaper than adaptation, but adaptation is still a necessity. And the fourth, and this is probably the most important take-home message and the reason why we hosted this conference today, is that by working together across municipalities, across organizations, we can leverage significantly more money and more resources than we could on our own. We're all in this together, so we need to be working towards an end goal together. This is the first step, this conference, in developing the Shoreup network into something more robust that can help support all of our coastal communities across the state as we face a changing climate. I hope that all of you will spend the time looking through the resource list, the contact list that is in your folder, and that we'll also email out to you, to start to develop these networks and start to make contacts with your fellow community members. And I hope you will all remember that the Island Institute, our other planning partners, the Casco Bay Estuary Partnership, the New England Environmental Finance Center, Allen and Resilience Works LLC, we're here to support you in these efforts. We need to know what you need so we can help carry this conversation forward as a state. Please let us know. Please take the opportunity to fill out your feedback cards, to leave us a sticky note, and more importantly, to just stay in contact with us, to keep us up to date on your most recent challenges and where you need help. We're here to build this network to benefit all of the state, and you are going to be a key part of this network moving forward. So thank you all for attending today. I'd just like to take another moment to quickly thank all of our speakers today. Let's give them another round of applause. Everyone's expertise, insights, and thoughts on these matters are key in helping us frame our thinking. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here in Maine. We can access the great work that other communities have done, and we've taken a step down that path today. I wanted to thank again our sponsors, the law firm of Eaton Peabody, Maine Coastal Program, and the Municipal Planning Assistance Program. Ruta, another shout out to you. Keep up the great work, and thank you for your help in this. Thank you again to my colleagues at the Island Institute, to our state representatives that were here. Representative, is facing on your name. So to our state representatives that are here today, to Senator King's office and Scott Wilkinson, who's here in attendance, thank you all so much for joining us and keeping an ear to the ground and paying attention to this situation. Thank you to Martha, Victoria, Casco Estuary Partnership, New England Environmental Finance Center, Alan, all of your hard work. This partnership has been instrumental in pulling this together today. If you're interested in following up with us on any of the issues that we touched on today, please let us know. And we're also interested in pulling together a policy working group to help continue the conversation in Augusta. Please reach out to us. We want to get this going over the next several weeks. Please let us know how you'd like to participate. We're here to support and move this forward and get people in Augusta so more folks can hear the messages and the challenges, and we can start to open up some new opportunities for funding. So, in the spirit of networking, we've reserved a private dining area over in Darby's Restaurant at 155 High Street. Please join us after the conference to continue conversations, to talk through some of the things you've learned today, and to let us know what we can do to help moving forward. The bill is your own, but we're happy to provide the conversation and the space. So please consider joining us. And thank you all again. Give yourselves a round of applause for taking the time to make your communities more resilient. Thank you all.